Hello and welcome to today's webinar. First, I want to welcome all of our colleagues from Ziegberg and especially also to all of our external attendees from all over the world. We are very happy that you're joining us today. Today we have three panelists: Tim Debus, President and CEO of the Reusable Packaging Association; Alina Maam, who is heading up the Circular Economy Hub at Ziegberg; and Sarah Ma, Ziegberg's Circular Economy Manager for Projects. And they will be discussing reuse in the packaging industry. Before we get started, I just want to go through some housekeeping to ensure that you can interact with myself and with the panelists. All attendees are automatically muted. If you want to ask the panelists a question, please type your question in the question box, not in the chat box, and the panelists will answer as many questions as possible during the Q&A session at the end of the talk. In the event that we experience any technical difficulties, please stay online and wait for instructions. And a recording of today's webinar will be made available. So as an introduction to today's topic, Ziegberg approaches the circular economy with a holistic strategy, and we're committed to being a circular economy enabler throughout the entire value chain. Part of our holistic approach is being a go-to partner for reusable packaging. And in doing so, we want to enable expert exchange. Reuse, as we know, is a strong circular economy lever to keep materials in use. And that's why Tim's deep knowledge around reusable models, we feel, can directly benefit all the members throughout the value chain. And this is why we are so pleased to have him here virtually today. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Tim.
Wonderful. Thank you much for that kind introduction. And it's terrific to be here today on this important topic. I really appreciate the chance to work with Ziegberg and the team and to be a part of this webinar to talk about what we can learn from reuse systems in the business-to-business network and apply those to other emerging reuse systems, especially with primary packaging or business-to-consumer applications for reuse systems. As noted, my name is Tim Debus with the Reusable Packaging Association. We're a nonprofit trade organization that works with member companies who supply, who use, and provide services to that system of reuse. We principally focus on transport packaging products like pallets, bins, containers, trays, with the distribution of goods in the supply chain. And clearly that's becoming more blurred and as more applications are going straight to consumers, whether it's e-commerce or the refill models associated with reusable packaging products. Our organization has actually been around for over 20 years. Reuse is certainly not a new concept. We're bringing it back after many decades and even generations. So we definitely want to tap into the wealth of knowledge and resources that we've gained over the last 20 years and apply them as the educational purposes and to promote reuse such as this forum. I wanted to start and show some examples of what I refer to as far as transport packaging or distribution packaging and how it transports products from, say, ingredients to finished goods or from the manufacturing of a part to an assembly plant, for example. In many of our day-to-day lives, we don't see this distribution packaging at work. It's behind the scenes, behind buildings, and typically they're out of sight, out of mind. But that's good because they're serving their purpose as far as the supply chain and bringing goods to market, to point of sale, to further manufacturing or processing. And we typically look at rigid materials because they provide durability, strength, stability to be able to perform the function over and over again, oftentimes packaging in bulk. But they could also be lighter weight, such as being manufactured with corrugated plastic materials, for example, providing a little more strength, more longevity associated with packaging products. So it really is application specific as far as how they're used, how they're designed and built to be durable for their intended purpose. I wanted to also highlight how retail, specifically supermarkets, grocery stores, are large users of reusable packaging products. And here, as a consumer, you may go to your local store and see products being integrated into the store itself, bringing goods to the shelves, bringing them into counters and displays. The traditional milk crate has been around for many decades. Bread trays are very common, and more we're seeing products delivering fresh fruits and vegetables in reusable plastic containers, for example. So even in our own neighborhood retail stores, we're seeing reuse at work with distribution packaging. And I think it's important to put that as a reminder later in this presentation and discussion about how the opportunities to leverage business to business reuse packaging systems and extend it into more business to consumer as well, and what lessons we can learn to provide there. These are examples of emerging consumer packaging reuse models. The Loop system has gained a lot of popularity as far as taking well-known consumer product brands and transitioning them from single-use packaging into durable, reusable packaging products. Over on the right side, we're seeing some great refill models at work, where consumers are taking their own packaging that they own back into stations, whether it's in store or even mobile, and being able to refill to how many quantities that they're looking for and pay at that price from a refill. And so those are gaining a lot of popularity for convenience and cost reductions. And even at the bottom left, just recently in the United States, there was launched a partnership to look at reusable grocery shopping bags, moving away from the single-use bags that are used only for, say, 15 to 20 minutes before they're discarded, and how can more reusable bags come into place with shopping experiences and bringing products from a store to the home, for example. Well, I wanted to talk really about the fundamentals for reuse and getting to some high-level discussion about what is the same. What can we learn from business to business and apply to business to consumer reuse applications? In many ways, these four fundamentals that I outline here are universal in terms of how you would approach a reuse model, what makes them most effective or high performing, whether it's in supply chain or consumer applications. And a lot of it starts with that business model. It's a different approach. It's moving from, say, the linear economic model and how products are distributed to the circular applications, to the circular model, for example. It's looking at the business differently. It's understanding that in this case, packaging is a valued asset. Packaging is designed for a purpose that we want to make sure we're maintaining its performance and retrieving it back, and of course, bringing value-added characteristics. And as a result, then we're eliminating waste. We're creating efficiencies. We're reducing greenhouse gas emissions, all the other benefits that we identify that are inherent with effective reusable models. So looking at that business approach and the strategy associated with the business becomes very important at the very center, or very front of looking at adopting into a reusable packaging model. It's identifying things like how many uses, how are we going to manage the assets, again, packaging as a desired valued product as it goes through its journey and comes back again and ready for reuse. The second is when we look at product design. Product design is very important as far as, is it going to achieve its intended purpose? Can it be optimized or maximized in order to gain more efficiencies that, say, wasn't even discovered at the onset of looking at reducing waste through reuse? It's that durability properties that you're building within your product so it could last infinitely number of uses and ultimately gain the economic value that it offers. And I think when you're looking at the business model and the product design, it's important to identify that reuse is about the system. It's not about the product. You could have the greatest product in the world. It could have all the bells and whistles. It could be innovative. But if you're not able to retrieve it, if you're not able to get it back, it's no longer reusable. It's just a very great one single-use product that you're not able to use again. So when we approach reuse, it's important that it's all about the system, and it's that holistic system from the entire supply chain and back again that needs to be managed. And that brings us to the collaboration. And it's very important when you look at that whole system that you've got partnerships established throughout that you're all on the same page as far as working together as partners in managing the value and taking advantage of that value of that reusable packaging asset. It's understanding that the protection and the preservation of that packaging product benefits all of us through the supply chain and back, not just in meeting environmental goals, but driving efficiencies, having cost-saving opportunities, fulfilling expectations, and delighting consumers with better, more durable products that may have some value-added features to them. So the idea is to walk through supply chains and understand how packaging is being used, and collaborating all the way through from your trading partners and beyond, and having the system working collaboratively in conjunction with each other in order to excel and deliver on what the reuse promise is. And then finally, what's really inherent is that reverse logistics. Again, it's having efficient processes and getting products back for their intended purpose. Together, when you have the system, you're designing for that system, and you've got the collaboration all the way through, and ultimately having effective reverse logistics, that really becomes the pillars of the reuse system, the fundamentals that become so important in approaching reuse and ultimately maximizing the benefits from what it has to offer. Well, I tried to capture this visually through a model, and it could be really simplistic as far as how you would look at it from a supplier of a product. And in the blue, it's more geared towards a visual behind transport packaging or B2B distribution, where you've got a supplier of products, it may be a pooler. Pooler is identified as someone who actually owns and manages the collection of reusable packaging assets. Then it goes to a user. They use up the product, and ultimately when they're done with packaging, the reverse logistics process starts as far as retrieving it back. It could go to a collection center, or it can go to a reverse logistics center that are popular here in the US as far as recovering products into a central location, sorted, and then distributed from there further down, and it could include cleaning, maintenance, and repair operations. I overlaid this visual with a consumer application, say from a restaurant, and it could be a reusable cup, it could be carry-out packaging, carry-out trays. And the idea, of course, is once the user, the consumer, is done, that you've got to find that collection point in which, if it's being taken away from the premises or the establishment, it could be collected easily. And this is where the convenience comes in of being able to have drop-off points or convenient locations for consumers to bring them back. And the idea is to have it aggregated all into a central location or locations in which you're already driving volume and the chance to be able to collect in mass, to go through that recollection, repositioning, cleaning process before it goes back to, say, the restaurant. So the commonalities associated with the reuse model are there between what would be a B2B application and a business to consumer or primary packaging application. And here, just looking at the restaurant model for the consumer interfacing with reusable packaging. Well, let's look at really what I've identified as key performance drivers, but they're really essentials. They're really factors in which a reusable packaging model is deemed to be successful. It's the operational or the implementation of reuse. And it all starts really within the business model that you're planning ahead to be able to meet these types of metrics, to be able to have a viable, economically superior reuse system in play. And it all starts with the terminology of trips or volume. And that's the number of issues that you would have. How many of uses are we talking about here as far as the number of cups that we would sell within a particular period? The number of crates that we need to be able to move from point A to point B. In the end, that's ultimately about scaling. It's about creating volume within a particular application that helps drive economic efficiencies through the reuse model. So the understanding at first is what's that forecast associated with the number of trips or issues that you would have for one single use of a reusable packaging product. When we look at cycle time, it's really about the speed in which that product is used. In many cases, you're measuring it in days. So if a consumer takes away a product, how quickly can we get that back for reuse? It's the velocity or the speed in which it moves through that full system, that full cycle of use until we can get it back again for reuse. And you can imagine how important this is. For example, if you've got 100 uses within a particular month, you don't necessarily need 100 reusable containers. If you can get that container back in 7 days, ultimately you can use it 4 times then within a month. So you only need then say 25 of those reusable containers if you can get it back and reuse it 4 times within that month to make it 100. And that has a big implication associated with how many of these do we need, right? And how many do we need to build? And that starts talking about capital and your investment in building that fleet or that pool of assets that you need to be able to do its job. And that leads to turns or turn rate. It's really expressed by how many uses we can get over a period of time. We could get 10 turns within a year, 20 turns within a year, for example, and that becomes a key measurement as you're building your reuse model. And again, these are same factors that are examined every day with business-to-business applications that hold true as well for business-to-consumer reuse models. When you're looking at that cycle, that all the touch points, dwell time comes into place. There may be gaps or there may be situations where that reusable packaging asset is sitting idle somewhere, whether it's waiting to be full in order it to go back and you're waiting to consolidate it so you've got a full truck, let's say, to help with shipping costs. It's that dwell, it's that idling that ultimately loses its efficiency. So you want to identify points in the supply chain that ultimately hold back the movement of that reuse product through its cycle. And this has a lot to do with the seasonality as well. And that's where you see some challenges associated with moving a product that may have spikes in seasons, whether it's the holiday period and you'll need more containers. Then when the holiday period's over, you've got assets that are idle because you don't need to have that many at that particular time. So seasonality comes into play in understanding how many containers we need to be able to meet certain peaks within the use. Loss rate is actually another big area. It's another big driver of performance that you've got to minimize, right? If you're losing the product and therefore taking it out of the reuse system, ultimately you're not being able to capitalize and maximize the reuse opportunities. So you want to make sure that you have that collaboration through the whole system that allows for everybody to manage the assets as a valued good that needs to be returned. Reducing the amount of escape that product may have ultimately would benefit the entire system and its economics. One of the big problems that we have in business-to-business distribution is that they're making really great, say, plastic crates and bins and pallets with high-quality recycled and even virgin plastic material. Well, that has a street value in the market, right? That resin, especially today with some of the restrictions on the recycled material, that a lot of theft occurs, unfortunately, and needs to have stronger safeguards of reusable assets. Because now they're high valued even as standalone or the raw material that you're using when you're talking about 5, 10, or even 40 pounds worth of a material that's moving through a supply chain. So loss rate becomes a very important aspect associated with the success of a reusable model. The lifespan, of course, how long is it going to last? If I use it 5 times a year, 10 times a year, how many years can I continue to use that product? And that becomes an important element of reuse because ultimately that's driving the value. That's putting a return on the capital that you're applying in order to build that particular product. And that's where over time, when you see the economic benefit of reuse versus single use, is that there may be more upfront cost with reuse because you're paying for a higher quality and more durable product. But if you continue to use it over the year and even over years at a period, ultimately that's going to pay off itself, and then everything else becomes a net profit as far as the use of that product. So that's where you get that return on that investment that's so popular with reuse and demonstrates what that long-term value is. And finally, operational cost, right? What's the transportation cost? What's the handling and sortation cost? What's the cleaning cost of the products? All that needs to be factored in ultimately to the single issue price of the product. And so all of these factors, these drivers here, again, relate to both business to business applications of reuse to the business to consumer. And all of them, while there could be a wide variety in which these applications are made, they're all inherently successful based on a combination or a collection of these particular drivers for reuse models. And this is where we come with really what we can leverage with business to business for business to consumer. Not only what we can learn, but how we can leverage it in the marketplace. And I go back to the idea, the notion that business to business or supply chain packaging is really the trunk of the tree, right? It builds the culture, it builds the operation that could be extended to business to consumer applications. It could help drive down costs. It could help produce scale in neighborhoods and regions and allow for more effective and faster growth of business to consumer applications. Here's one example with reverse logistics. The picture on the left basically shows reusable packaging that's outside of a retail store ready to be picked up and starting that journey back into its intended use. So you see a lot of crates and pallets and bins. This is already taking place in retail environments around the world in your neighborhoods. And then it moves into a common sortation facility. This picture on the right shows a reverse logistics center in which all of the individual stores are being picked up and moved to a more centralized location that's handling all of this in mass. In fact, this is a third-party owner and manager of this system. So this is an organization or a company that their whole purpose is to pick up items, retrieve them, sort them, and get them to their owners as quickly as possible. And how can this system that's already in place in our economy today could help provide resources and expertise and operational logistics to support business to consumer models as well. This is a picture I wanted to show here. It's a picture that I took a couple years ago of a smaller retail format, but a international chain that basically shows that they're doing both, right? They've got reusable packaging products like these totes there on the left, but of course they're also doing a lot of single-use packaging. But they have a process in place in which all of that is being picked up and moved somewhere. This is one that's somewhat of a head shaker in the sense that they've got the system in place to do more reusable packaging for their own internal operations and supply chain, but they haven't converted it yet. They continue to do more of the single-use disposable, and this is one where we still have a lot of work to do in the business to business as far as distribution reuse of our packaging products. And I wanted to kind of illustrate how this all could come together, again, taking our model that when it comes to e-commerce, when it comes to consumers, you've got your warehouse, you could actually go to households, it could move back to the physical retail store as a collection point, and it could also be consolidated with cafes, restaurants, other stores into a centralized location that everybody shares into, that's run by either a third-party organization, for example, that could really help process and bring scale to the reverse logistics so everybody can benefit. Could provide washing services and operations. In fact, it's many of these activities that really is about the economic growth of the circular economy. When you say circular economy, it's really an economic model. It's not a sustainability model. It's about having economic growth with value added to creating opportunities such as things like sortation and collection centers, wash centers. It's a new economy that's associated with the effective handling of reusable products, for example. Finally, before I turn the mic over, I wanted just to touch base on one of the reasons we're here for our discussions today is to look at the role of inks and coatings that Siegwerk operates and how they can enable and provide value into the reusable systems. This is an example of reusable plastic containers that have labels associated with them that ultimately need to be staying on, but they need to come off as well. The idea is that each crate has a particular intended use here, but at some point that use is over over. You want to get that product back. You want to clean it. You want to basically have it look as if it's never been used before. And unfortunately, if you've got labels or label residue, it just doesn't provide that visual appearance if it's maybe clean, but has some residual materials on it. But this is where reusable inks, this is where inks that could play a role in identification of products, whether it's regulatory requirements, whether it's brand marketing. They actually could provide a solution to overcome a lot of challenges associated with how products look in the reusable packaging system and look fresh, new, and branded every single use. That in many cases often are hurdles in order to achieve that in the normal marketplace. Well, that's it for me as far as that overview. Hopefully that was helpful in terms of some high-level thinking about what we learn and know and practice every day with B2B reuse systems and how that can be applied to B2C systems for reusable packaging. So I look forward to further questions and discussions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Tim. Okay, now we are going to be moving on to the panel discussion. And I think as a starting point, I think Tim's last slide was a really good segue into this. My first question, and I'm going to kind of aim this at you, Alina, is it's really interesting to hear about the reuse models and how they're evolving within the B2C space. But where does Siegwerk fit in, and where do inks and coatings fit in from your perspective?
Yeah, sure. It's a short question. I can give a very long answer to that, so feel free to cut in at any point. But I actually want to sort of go back to something Tim said, and it was reuse is about the system, not the product. And that is absolutely true. The system has to work. However, the product has to be designed for that system. The product design has to fit the system. And this is where inks and coatings also come into play. If you think about the reuse system with the flow of logistics, the reuse rates, the consumer-facing side of things, all of that is relevant for inks and coatings. So maybe just to give you a few examples how they move into the space. If you think about attractiveness of the product, when does a consumer pick a product? It's because the product is a marketing space. The brand speaks to you. That has to hold true for reuse as well. If we look at the sort of the more consumer-facing side, so inks and coatings will inevitably have to be on the packaging, on the reusable packaging. Now comes a second layer. If you think about it, you can sort of attract consumers with different shapes and sizes and touches and feels. If you think about your single-use space. All of that we don't want in the reuse space. We want nice standardized items because they make logistics easier, they make cleaning easier, they make filling easier, all of that. So inks and coatings actually have a higher job to do because they're the only branding message you have. And then taking it a step further even, branding is nice. I don't think there will be any brand out there that will ever decide to put entirely naked packaging on the market. At least I've never heard it in a conversation. But there's also the consumer. You need certain information. If you think about allergies, if you think about food packaging, but also best before dates, and of course other ingredient lists. So inks and coatings and the information perspective they build trust in reuse systems. You can even take it as far as look at not only inks, but also coatings, for example, that play a massive role here as well. Consumer trust is a lot about hygiene. Can I trust this packaging to be clean? Coatings can work magic literally there. And also, if you think about packaging durability, the design again, that you don't have scratches, cracks in the packaging that make it actually more prone to less hygienic settings. So all of this, and I could go on and on and on, is the role of inks and coatings. So it's everything we have with single use plus a little bit more because it has this ability to standardize and build trust in this emerging setting. There's one important thing I would like to add, because sometimes we forget about that when we talk reuse. Reuse has a certain lifespan, but then it also has an end of life, like every other packaging. And I actually have this little example. I don't know if you can see it, but this is a bottle from Germany. And it actually says on the bottle that you can use it 15 times, which I find really nice because it makes reuse more tangible. But it also shows something happens with this bottle after 15 use cycles. It will be recycled. So if we think about the product design in reuse, it has to fit the reuse system, but ideally it also has to fit sort of design recycling criteria. And we're going to stop here because otherwise I'm never going to find an end to it, just because it's a very fascinating topic.
No problem. Always good to hear some passion. Sarah, do you have anything to add to that, or Tim? Sarah, maybe?
I think Alina's done a good job covering it.
Okay, great. Okay, so my follow-up question is and I'm going to probably direct this at you, Sarah, is what aspects of the value chain should we be considering?
Yeah, thanks, Carla. So just to build on what Tim and Alina have said, I think there's 3 areas that need to be considered within the value chain for reuse. One is to engage players to facilitate a robust data system. The second would be forming unconventional partnerships, as Tim had alluded to in his presentation. And the third would be putting an emphasis or really understanding these convergent points in the system. Again, as Tim had mentioned, these are cleaning facilities, sortation facilities. And so just to elaborate, so within a data system, what can it do? When you're thinking about reuse, it's really important to have a methodology to benchmark packaging products in terms of not only cost and convenience, but environmental impact as well, especially if you're comparing it to the traditional single-use systems. Additionally, a data system can help understand this full opportunity and value when you're considering moving into the reusable system from a single use. You really need to understand what is the invest required and then the return on investment. And if we think about how information is tracked and traced on a physical pack system to a digital platform, there needs to be a readable interface between the digital and the physical world. And often that's printed with ink. So if we think about barcodes or QR codes or digital watermarks, several examples exist. And there needs to be a compatibility and even an innovation between the technology platforms or the scanning systems around data input and the ink encoding. So you have that traceability on the packaging systems or the packaging assets. And the second point, so this idea around partnerships. So you need to have the right partnerships in place to really respond to consumer and customer packaging demands. There's because as Tim mentioned, there's this big importance around the connection between the system and the pack design. It's really important not to only innovate just in this design, but also innovate in the types of collaborations to bring this design to life. So we need to have the end of life and the start of life. Even though in reuse, you shouldn't really have an end of life, or at least maybe not until 15 use cycles for certain bottles.
Or more.
Or hopefully more.
Preferably more.
But where we're really seeing success in these different reuse models is when you have a systems approach and you have value chain players across the system collaborating to provide a single solution or multiple solutions, but with an aligned approach. It's definitely not an area where a siloed approach you will have as much success. And then the third point that I had mentioned is these convergent points in the system. And so what I mean with this is when we think about reusable packaging flowing through a closed loop, we need to focus on where does the value chain converge and how to minimize bottlenecks and cost inefficiencies at these points. So an example of how efficiency of reuse can be enabled by inks and coatings is what Alina had mentioned around standardization versus individualization. If you think about individualization in single-use pack systems, where there's multiple grades of freedom, both on size and shape, this simply is not as efficient in a reuse system where reverse logistics are so important. You get huge cost inefficiencies and handling fees associated with individualization. And so if you can enable standardization through perhaps print or color design on a standardized shape and size of pack, this increases the cost efficiency at these convergent areas, therefore increasing the cost efficiency around the entire system, minimizing the amount of SKUs in the system, and really enabling scalability within reuse. I don't know, Tim, Alina, any other points to add?
Yeah, maybe just sort of an adjacent thought, because we often talk about scalability and all that. And one of the criticism I often hear about reuse and sort of the reuse pilots out there is, well, they don't solve all the problem. It's only one product or packaging type. It's only cups, or it's, it's only the burger box or whatever. I think what we have to keep in mind is that we have to gain experience in these new systems. That's why I love that we can look to B2B, but also have trust in these small pilots. If we have one pilot, for example, in one city only, maybe really only on one packaging type, but all the system players come together and play it through once to see how does it work. It's a great learning base to then scale it to other applications, other regions, other players. So yeah, just sort of a call out to trust in the pilots that are out there and connect where possible.
Yeah, I'd love to chime in and capitalize on the whole value chain notion. And as Lena mentioned about having the trust in the system, I find that when you go through more of a comprehensive approach to a reuse model, looking at a particular application, ask the question, what if? Don't be afraid to see things that may be outside of what your initial objective is, and ask about how we can impact that. What can we do from a packaging design or process improvement that could also have a secondary benefit to it? Discovery is an exciting part of a reuse model, especially when you have a chance to look at how that product is used outside of your particular business domain or your four walls into your customers or their customers, and how that impacts going back, say, on a reverse logistics process. The value chain is actually much larger, or could be, than just what your delivery of your particular product to your customer may be. I remember designing reusable packaging products, and I was walking through the entire system. This happened to be a perishable food product that was being distributed to retail. And I documented over 30 points in the supply chain in which switching from a single use to a reusable packaging made a difference economically, labor wise, efficiencies. Not all of it was positive. It wasn't like we could design for all 30 to be favorable. There were some that were less favorable. But realistically, what you're looking at is that net gain, that benefit of reuse. That, say, 25 of the 30 had superior performance out of the reuse system, and then you add up and you look at what that total impact is for the entire use, and it's extraordinary. So come into that value chain looking to discover, looking to innovate, looking to expand beyond where opportunity sees itself. And one area also is technology. And Sarah mentioned about the technology role that has for business today, and particularly with packaging, and how technology can be used in concert with the physical properties and identity of the product. So can we create smart packaging items that not only transmitting data into the cloud, into users, to have more engagement with customers, to have better inventory control and awareness of our products, but how does that also play a role with the physical identity and the critical requirements that are needed to be on that physical product itself and how the two can play together. So that's where when you've got inks and coatings and ways to mark and brand, that plays a significant role that can also complement the use of technologies for the highest value that you can deliver to your customer.
Tim, you mentioned a few times it's sort of understanding how it is used, or this discovery of reuse. I really like that sort of this notion, which all at the end boils down to what is the utility of the packaging actually. And I think this is another aspect. If when we look at reuse, it's really valuable to expand our horizon and think about what is the value that packaging here actually can deliver. Because for reuse, it's not only protection and branding, but it might also be something like customer loyalty. If you have a return system, maybe in a subscription model, if it's online, that means you have a customer that's tied to you. I think this is also when we explore the utility, when we discover the space, when we think about new packaging and system design, something that takes training because we're not used to it. We usually stay within our box, but which is absolutely possible, and then ultimately creates that net gain, Tim, that you were speaking about, because it is in the system. You just have to tickle it out.
One good example that I see, it's common in the market as far as, okay, we can design a reusable packaging product that's going to protect the product, it's going to provide airflow and help preserve the quality of, say, a perishable, food commodity, for example, and we can deliver it all to the customer. It's got ergonomics to it. It's easy to, but all of a sudden you see how that interacts, say, at a warehouse. You're like, well, wait a minute. We could probably get another layer on that pallet because of the strength and stability of that pallet. We could build taller stacks and load more product in a truck that we don't have to worry about that pallet tipping over, for example. There's many ways that we can say, well, if we reduce that packaging by a centimeter, we can add that second layer, or we could do more with it throughout. And these are the discoveries that ultimately you want to be able to understand, not just within your operations, but your customers. And that's where you get a lot of the aha moments that really generate excitement, where you could bring a reusable solution to your customer saying, if we switch to this, here's also where I think you can benefit. Here's where we could change this process and really gain a lot of speed of our operations, provide better worker health and safety, automate the lines. There's just so many things that it opens up to, but it's having that whole view of that entire system, of that value chain that's beyond what you're traditionally used to in terms of looking at how that product moves from point A to point B, from a retail store to the consumer, as you mentioned, with brand loyalty, with data that can be provided to the consumer that talks about where it's from, what's the origin of it, where was it packed, all that information that is popular to many of the consumers out there.
Maybe just to add on to this, because I really like what you both touched on here, is I think another thing that reusable packaging can enable is establishing a level of accountability. It's almost as if, at least from the B2C perspective, you're shifting from a commodity, a packaging commodity, to an asset that's owned either within the consumer space or within the system itself. And therefore, an asset you want to keep into the system, so the different players along the system need to be incentivized to maintain it. And there's several factors that need to come into play to not only ensure it can stay in the system, but then the right incentive schemes are there. So everything from design to the interface with the consumer, and how to make sure that all the different value chain players have the right incentive to keep this asset circulating in the system. I think, again, this is another point of importance where collaboration is absolutely key.
Yeah, Sarah, I couldn't agree more in terms of the treatment or the handling of the packaging as a valued asset. And that's really the big change, and maybe with the biggest hurdle we have, especially when we're looking at involving consumers, is that packaging is not waste. it shouldn't be waste. And in this case, with reuse, it's designed not to be waste. That they're incentivized to maintain that packaging because they're getting a better experience. They're getting a better product overall. And so how can you incentivize them to participate, to return that item in a timely manner, to make sure it doesn't get lost or even thrown into the recycling bin, for example. And it's making that change that what products and what we're doing in the commercial marketplace is actually, value driven. It's actually beneficial. You're creating, new experiences, for customers. And that's when I start thinking that we're going to really see that model change from linear to circular, from single use to reuse, is when the features of the product are going to be too good to waste. When there's going to be incentives because it's driving efficiencies, it's lowering costs, it's enabling for better quality products, and you're seeing that in the marketplace even today. And that's one of the selling points of that loop system, is that I think it's great that when you have, say, soap or shampoo, or you've got Clorox wipes and such, if they're in a single-use container, well, I'm going to put this under the sink, right? Because it's not exactly something I want to, reveal or have outside. But if it's in a nice stainless steel container, it looks good, it's fashionable, maybe you would put that up on top of your sink, right? Because it's got better appearance, it's got better characteristics. These are the things that I think are going to be changing that mindset and allow for more adoption and participation into reuse.
I mean, to jump in there, because we often are so afraid of this reuse. It's everything is new, but I think this idea of displaying packaging is actually not very new. If you think about liquor, for example, roughly 1/3 of the cost of a liquor bottle that you buy is the packaging. There goes a lot of money in that packaging because we display it. So there's actually even things from single use that we already know, that we're accustomed to, that we can translate very easily to reuse. Maybe taking down that that inner hurdle a little bit to jump in. And also just this financial perspective, I find it really, really interesting, because if I were a CFO of the company, how do I look at packaging right now? I look at it at operational expenditure. So I want to keep costs down at all means. I'm going to hustle with the marketing department. I'm going to hustle with the technicians. If they can lower the cost, purchasing, lower the cost. If I change to look at it as a capital expenditure, an investment, suddenly I'll go for that quality of the packaging, make it more durable, because I want as much as return from my investment. And I think this is sort of something that is slowly starting, and which then automatically, and this is the beauty of it, makes more sustainable products. I mean, that's not only the case for packaging, but for many other things. So there are other benefits to it as well if we continue this mind shift.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to have to stop this very interesting discussion. I wish we could go on for longer, but I do want to use the last 10 minutes just for Q&A from our attendees. So we already have a couple of questions. If you have any questions, please post them in the question box. The first question, B2C reusables, fantastic presentation. As Tim highlighted, among many things important aspects of reusable packaging is to maximize use and cycle time and minimize the reverse logistics, cleaning, refilling. And localized solutions like personal refill stations in a local grocery store makes a lot of sense. However, for a reuse solution like Loop for shampoo, how many times does it need to be reused to have a net positive impact, where a totally different reverse logistics, cleaning and refilling process needs to be set up? And what are your thoughts on estimating the median cycle time for consumer good items, for example, median time to empty and return a shampoo bottle? That was a very long question.
Well, Sarah,
you want me to break it down? I can do that.
Because you read this, yeah, I know you did some data research on sort of the breaking even point of reuse in the consumer space?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I can kick it off and then please jump in to add on. So this is highly dependent on the material type and the system in which it operates. Even the product that's inside of the packaging, this also has an effect on the net impact of the net environmental impact of the packaging itself. So a median is it's difficult to nail down. This is why I alluded to it's so important to have a very robust data system supporting your reusable packaging system. This will give an indication not only to understand where the failure points are and the costs associated, but to give more information to feed into the environmental impact assessment. There are a ton of LCAs that are coming out with different systems for between clamshells, metal bottles, recycled PP for on-the-go food, but it's very much in its infancy. And so to pinpoint a median use case, it's very difficult to deduce. But I've heard, yeah, everything from 3 to 4 uses is a break even from an environmental impact perspective, or it becomes better than a single use. Everything up to 42 use cycles. It's just highly dependent on the system in which it feeds into and the materials used. I don't know, Tim, if you have maybe more interesting data from the B2B side to complement this.
Well, the variables involved make it very difficult to pinpoint. I will kind of look at it 2 ways. You know, you've got your return on capital that you've got to pay off your assets that you buy or you build for your reusable system. And then you've got your operating costs, which truly has variable costs, whether it's transportation, washing, that could change, over time. One popular model that continues to grow is, and people are investing in, is actually when you rent or lease reusable packaging products. So you basically take away the capital requirements because somebody else is putting that up. And you're renting or leasing to be able to leverage, the use of the reusable packaging to be able to have a more cost-effective packaging scheme for you and your customers. So there's a variety of new ways I think that companies are offering reusable packaging that you can either buy or rent to own or even lease, because you've got a third-party owner that's managing that business. A lot of different models that can be put into place, but from a return, gosh, when I can break even, it really is just depending on what your input costs are, and ultimately what you're able to have as a margin, I think, based on the selling price of that unit, and then of course the cost to get it back and put it into a reissue. And that is so many variabilities to it, depending on the application. It's tough to pinpoint. But I think the key is that there are models or formulas that are well established to be able to get to that point. As I noted earlier, when you factor in trips and turn rates, cycle times, all of those are key factors in a spreadsheet that allow you then to get to that ROI or that break-even point associated with the cost of the packaging.
And maybe just to add one thought, or again, sort of some encouragement, the break-even point is usually lower than we expect it to be, because also single use has logistics, and we sometimes forget about it. Especially our waste has significant logistics. And if you then account for the production logistics, the use, and the waste logistics versus production, we use logistics, and then a final bracket of recycling logistics. That's where the beauty comes into play, if we really compare apples to apples and not forget about sort of the logistics part of our waste.
It's a great point, Alina. I appreciate that. You hear a lot of people like, well, if it's reuse, I've got to pay for the cost of returning it. Well, they may forget that there's a cost often passed to the taxpayer, the municipality, as far as the waste, the single use, whether it goes to recycling or more and more we see it going straight to disposal. That is changing a little bit with extended producer responsibility laws and shifting the financial burden of how waste is being paid for and managed. But you're right, in many cases, this is where you've got to look at that entire utility of the product and supply chain if you're going to do a compare and contrast of reuse and single use. Many cases, when you lose a product, it's no longer within your responsibility in a single use. That's where you tend to stop on your compare and contrast on a financial. But no, it actually has implications in the cost of goods all the way downstream that may not be a part of your books, but is impacting your customers or ultimately the end consumer as well.
Great. So let's move on to the next question. What do you think is missing in the technology supporting reuse currently? So maybe let's start with Alina, not Alina.
I can go. No, maybe I'll just give it a quick start. So I think harmonized technology to get that data in place. I think if I would have to pinpoint to the most glaring gap, it's that a harmonized data system to give a very exact answer to that question that was raised before, and to optimize and to really make the best out of this net gain. So I would put my money on that.
Well, what I think missing in terms of technology, I'm seeing the most incredible innovative technology that's coming to market, both on a hardware and a data capture software capabilities. It's absolutely tremendous, and I think it's the most exciting area of reuse that's going to allow for smart packaging, in which to compare against single uses, it's no longer going to be comparable as far as what equipping reusable packaging with the technology investment that you would never do if something was going to be thrown away after one-time use. And I think ultimately that's going to drive a gap in creating a level of benefit in the market that you're not going to be able to turn away from it. And I think that's where we're going to be with reuse and the use of technology in the near future. But I'm seeing some terrific things. But as Alina noted, at some point there needs to be some commonality in which that data is being captured and interpreted. And I think this may come with big companies that may have multiple products. They may want to have a single system in which all of their data rolls up into one for their interpretation and the utility of that data. And that's where you're going to see maybe some standardization or harmony associated with how that data is being captured and used. But I think it's truly a fantastic breakthrough for reusable packaging as far as now having smart products being a part of your system.
And just to add on to this, I think the data capturing methods need to be, there needs to be no disruption into consumer convenience. Minimize any barriers to switch. And so when we have more and more smart and convenient data capturing methods within the value chain, within the interactions with consumers, I think we'll also see fewer hurdles with mainstreaming reuse models.
Okay, I think let's do one last question and then we can end the webinar. Hi, Tim. Any specific solutions for liquid products?
Sure. I can say firsthand with, say, bulk liquids being distributed in a business to business, there's a tremendous amount of technologies, bag-and-box systems, automated fill and depletion technologies that are out there. So for liquids, there's quite a bit of effective products that are designed for reuse in the supply chain. For consumer products, whether that's bottles, beverage, bottles, other things, that's where I think there's going to be a lot of cutting edge developments in terms of bottles that we may use as consumers, but then it can be distributed back to its refill point, whether it's a restaurant or a retailer, for example. And I think this is where we're seeing a lot of good design. But a lot of these are more new about the product. What really needs to happen is looking at more design around that system, because that's what's going to ultimately allow these to scale and do so effectively for everybody to benefit from. So I hope in terms of liquids, it's a little big of a market, but certainly the transport of liquids is something that's done quite well in reusable systems.
Great. Okay, so we're going to end it there, and we are 1 minute over, so pretty good timing. So I just want to thank everyone again. Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you, Alina. Thank you to Sarah for joining us. And obviously, thank you to all of our attendees. As I said, this recording will be available, and hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you, Tim, for joining us.
My pleasure.
Thank you so
Bye.
much. Bye-bye.